Christmas night arrived quietly in the Arizona desert, carrying none of the noise or warmth people expect from the holiday. The sky was clear and sharp with stars, the air colder than it had been all week. Most houses in the small rural town glowed briefly, then went dark early, families retreating inside. Beyond the last dirt road, the desert stretched out untouched, empty, and indifferent. She stood alone near the stable, pulling her jacket tighter as the wind slipped through the mesquite trees. The young woman had spent the evening smiling when expected, answering questions she didn't want to answer, pretending the day meant more than it did. The ride was never meant to be long. Just a short escape. A familiar route. Something to quiet her thoughts before the night ended. The horse shifted beneath her, sensing the tension she hadn't spoken aloud. She rested a hand against its neck, breathing in the dry, dusty scent that had always felt grounding. Riding at night wasn't unusual for her. She knew the land, the trails, the way sound traveled differently after dark. Or at least she believed she did. There was no farewell. No message sent. No sense that anything was about to go wrong. She mounted, guided the horse forward, and let the stable fade behind her. Hooves pressed into sand already cooling from the day's sun. The rhythm calmed her at first, the darkness wrapping around them like a blanket. The desert, however, does not stay quiet for long. A distant coyote call echoed across the flats. Wind carved soft lines across the trail, blurring edges she normally recognized. Somewhere ahead, clouds moved across the moon, thinning the light. She slowed slightly, adjusting her path without realizing how subtly it was changing. Minutes passed. Then more. The familiar landmarks began to disappear into shadow. She told herself she would turn back soon. One more stretch. One more moment of calm. The thought repeated itself until it stopped meaning anything at all. By the time she noticed the silence had changed, the town lights were gone behind her. The trail felt wider, less certain. The horse hesitated once, then again. She urged it forward gently, trusting instinct over doubt. Christmas night closed in, cold and vast, as the desert accepted her presence without acknowledgement. Somewhere between one breath and the next, the ride stopped being an escape. It became something else entirely. She did not know that no one was watching the trail anymore, that no headlights would cut across the sand, that the night would keep its secrets. The stars above offered no direction, only distance. Behind her, celebration faded into memory. Ahead, the desert waited patiently. When she finally slowed the horse to listen, truly listen, the stillness answered back, heavy and absolute, carrying with it the first quiet warning that this Christmas would not end the way it began. She shifted in the saddle, unaware that this pause marked the last safe moment behind her. The desert opened wider as she rode, the darkness swallowing the narrow trail behind her. The pause she had taken moments earlier lingered in her chest, a quiet unease she tried to dismiss. She adjusted the reins, listening to the soft rhythm of hooves, telling herself the hesitation meant nothing, that familiarity would return if she kept moving forward slowly. The trail curved subtly, then again, changing in ways she couldn't immediately name. What had once been instinct now required thought. The moon slipped behind thin clouds, flattening the land into indistinct shapes. She felt the horse tense beneath her, its ears flicking as if responding to something she could not hear hidden nearby in the vast desert night air. She slowed, scanning the ground for markers she remembered by feel rather than sight. Rocks blended together. Washes appeared where she didn't recall them. Doubt crept in carefully, not yet panic, just the faint awareness that turning around might not be as simple as it should have been at night alone without lights or landmarks nearby guiding her safely home. The temperature dropped faster than expected, cold settling through her jacket and into her arms. She shifted in the saddle, debating whether to stop or push forward. Stopping meant admitting she was unsure. Moving meant trusting a direction she could no longer clearly recognize beneath the stars that now felt distant and unfamiliar above her, silent, cold, and unmoving tonight. A sound broke the stillness, faint but distinct, something shifting beyond her line of sight. She froze, listening. The desert answered with nothing definitive, only space and echoes. Her breathing sounded too loud in her ears as she urged the horse onward again, choosing motion over fear without fully understanding why she felt compelled to continue riding deeper forward alone. Time stretched unevenly, minutes blurring into something shapeless. She checked her phone, the screen dimming quickly in the cold, no signal visible. For the first time, a sharper thought surfaced. She was farther out than planned, farther than she could easily explain to anyone waiting back home, expecting her return soon before midnight, before worry turned into questions and fear. She tried to retrace her path, guiding the horse into a slow turn. The landscape resisted recognition. Every direction looked equally unfamiliar. The realization settled heavily. The ride was no longer casual. It demanded decisions she hadn't prepared to make alone in the dark, with distance growing behind her step by step, second by second, uncertainty tightening its grip silently. She pressed on, choosing movement because stopping felt worse. Somewhere ahead, she believed, the trail would correct itself. The desert offered no confirmation, only endless quiet. Christmas night stretched on, and with each step forward, the way back faded further into uncertainty, marking the moment her disappearance truly began, unseen, unnoticed, and dangerously irreversible beneath the vast Arizona desert sky. Far away, beyond her awareness, the town settled into sleep. Lights went out. Roads emptied. The night erased ordinary boundaries between places. No one marked the moment she became lost. Only that time continued moving forward without her as Christmas quietly passed into the early hours, while the desert kept her presence hidden from everyone searching nowhere, yet, at all. Eventually, she stopped forcing confidence and listened to the horse, allowing it to choose the path. It hesitated, then moved on without certainty. The decision felt small, but it sealed what followed. By the time she realized she was truly lost, the desert had already closed behind her, leaving no clear trail for anyone to follow into the coming morning. Christmas morning arrived without ceremony. The desert cooled into pale stillness, light spreading slowly across sand that held no clear record of the night before. Back at the stable, the space where the horse should have been stood empty. At first, the absence meant nothing. The young woman often rode early, sometimes longer than planned. Assumptions filled the silence easily. Hours passed. Coffee grew cold. A glance toward the horizon turned into waiting. The phone stayed quiet. Concern entered carefully, not yet panic, but something heavier than inconvenience. Someone walked the edge of the property, scanning familiar ground, expecting to see hoofprints or movement returning along the trail. There was nothing. No sound. No dust. Only distance. By late morning, the absence became undeniable. The desert looked unchanged, indifferent to worry forming beyond its edge. Calls were made, tentative at first, explaining the situation without urgency, as if tone alone could prevent fear from becoming real. She had gone riding last night. She hadn't come back. That was all anyone could say with certainty. A small group gathered near the trailhead, eyes drawn toward the open land. The tracks were faint, already softened by wind, but they existed, pointing outward. Someone followed them on foot for a short distance, stopping when the sand flattened and the direction became unclear. The trail dissolved quietly, leaving nothing to argue with. Questions surfaced quickly. Why ride at night? Why go alone? Each question carried accusation beneath concern. No one answered them. The desert offered no response either. It simply stretched farther wider, making every direction feel equally possible and equally wrong. As the sun climbed, the temperature shifted, warming the air while unease deepened. A call reached a local responder, then another. Holiday schedules slowed everything. Search efforts were discussed rather than launched. Time slipped away politely, unnoticed, while the desert held its ground. Someone checked the roads leading back toward town, expecting an explanation that would make sense later. There were no signs. No vehicle. No figure walking along the shoulder. Just empty asphalt shimmering under sunlight. The quiet felt deliberate now, like something being withheld. By afternoon, worry sharpened into fear. The idea that she might simply return faded with each passing hour. The night's darkness no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent, as though it had left something behind. The desert seemed larger than it had ever been, its openness no longer inviting, only vast. A decision was made to organize a search before daylight faded again. Maps were pulled out, routes discussed, landmarks named aloud in hopes of anchoring uncertainty. Yet even as plans formed, doubt crept in. The desert erased mistakes quickly. If she was hurt, lost, or wandering, time was already working against her. No one noticed that the sand near the trail showed no clear return marks. No fresh hoofprints pointing home. Only outward movement, faint and scattered, as if the land itself had chosen to blur the truth. Christmas morning passed quietly, unnoticed by most of the world. As evening approached, headlights gathered at the edge of the desert. Voices lowered. Radios crackled. The first real search was about to begin. Somewhere beyond sight, the land waited, holding what it had taken, as concern finally turned into action and the question of where to look became terrifyingly uncertain. No one yet understood how far she had gone, or how wrong their assumptions were. The search would move outward logically, methodically, never knowing the truth lay elsewhere, already slipping farther away as the desert prepared to test everyone involved before night returned again without mercy anywhere. The search began where certainty still existed, at the trailhead where Christmas night had last left a trace. Headlights cut across the sand, illuminating fragments of movement pressed into the ground hours earlier. Hoofprints emerged first, uneven and shallow, already softened by wind. They were enough to give direction, enough to give hope, even as everyone understood how fragile that hope was becoming. Searchers moved carefully, spreading out in a loose line. A tracker crouched low, studying the ground as if it might speak if watched closely enough. The prints moved steadily at first, following a recognizable path. Radios crackled quietly, voices restrained, respectful of the silence that seemed to dominate the land. Every step forward felt meaningful, as though proximity alone might bring answers. But the desert resisted order. After less than a mile, the tracks began to fracture. One set veered slightly left, then corrected. Another curved back before dissolving entirely. Wind had swept across the sand during the night, smoothing edges, filling impressions, erasing intention. What remained looked confused, scattered, as if direction itself had been lost along with her. Someone pointed out disturbances in the sand, shallow marks that could have been footsteps, or could have been nothing at all. The group paused, debating quietly. If she had dismounted, it changed everything. If she had fallen, the horse might have panicked. Each theory branched into another set of possibilities, none of them comforting. They pushed forward anyway, trusting experience over doubt. The tracker followed subtle signs most people would miss. Crushed brush, displaced stones, faint lines cutting across dry washes. For a brief moment, the trail reformed, pulling them farther into the desert. Radios carried updates back toward the vehicles. Progress was slow, but it was progress. Then, without warning, it ended. The prints scattered into open ground where wind and time had erased distinction. Sand stretched uninterrupted in every direction. No clear exit. No sign of struggle. No blood. No broken equipment. Just emptiness. The tracker stood slowly, scanning the horizon, frustration visible even in silence. The desert had taken the trail and given nothing back. They searched outward in widening arcs, hoping to catch something missed. Nothing surfaced. The horse's path, once the strongest lead, had simply vanished. The realization settled heavily. The desert did not preserve mistakes. It absorbed them. What felt recent already belonged to the land. Questions grew sharper. Why were there no return tracks? Why no clear sign of injury? The absence of evidence became evidence itself, unsettling and hard to explain. Some suggested the horse had wandered off without her. Others believed she might still be moving, disoriented, pushing deeper without realizing it. No one said aloud what everyone was thinking, that every passing hour reduced the chance of survival. As the afternoon wore on, the sun beat down, draining energy and patience. Holiday or not, resources were limited. Decisions had to be made about where to focus, where not to waste time. Maps were consulted again, fingers tracing routes that made sense on paper but felt meaningless against the scale of the desert. The search coordinator made a call to regroup before dark. It wasn't a retreat, only a pause, but it felt like failure. The desert seemed unchanged by their presence, offering no acknowledgement of concern or effort. Tracks that had promised answers now led nowhere at all. As teams returned toward the vehicles, unease lingered. The trail hadn't ended naturally. It had been interrupted, blurred, erased too quickly. Somewhere beyond the last visible sign, something had gone wrong. No one could say what or when. When night began to gather again at the edges of the land, radios fell quiet. The search would resume at first light, expanded and more urgent. But as darkness settled, one truth became unavoidable. Whatever had happened to her had already pushed beyond the place logic said to look. And while searchers prepared to return, far away from them, the young woman faced her first full night alone, without knowing how many people were already losing her trail. Night fell quickly once the sun disappeared, as if the desert had been waiting for permission to reclaim the ground. She felt the temperature drop almost immediately, heat draining from her body with every breath. The horse shifted nervously beneath her, hooves scraping against stone, its breath visible in the cold air. Darkness pressed in from all sides, deeper and heavier than she expected. She dismounted when the ground grew too uneven to trust from the saddle. The decision felt careful, sensible, yet it separated her from the one thing still moving with confidence. She tied the reins loosely around her wrist and walked, counting steps, listening for anything familiar. The desert offered nothing back. No trail. No lights. Only the sound of wind brushing dry plants like whispers she couldn't understand. Fear arrived slowly. At first it was practical, focused on staying warm, staying calm. She layered clothing, rubbed her arms, checked her phone again even though she already knew the outcome. The screen glowed weakly, then dimmed. No signal. The battery warning appeared, sharp and final. She turned it off, saving what little remained, already mourning the loss of connection it represented. She considered staying put. Every rule she had ever heard echoed in her mind. Don't wander. Don't panic. Let yourself be found. But the desert didn't feel like a place where stillness guaranteed rescue. The night air cut through her jacket, and the ground offered no shelter, only exposed rock and sand that held cold instead of warmth. She led the horse toward a shallow dip in the land, hoping for protection from the wind. When she stopped, silence rushed back in, louder than any sound. She could hear her own breathing, uneven now, and the soft stomp of the horse shifting its weight. Somewhere far away, an animal called out, then another. The distance made it worse, not better. She wrapped her arms around herself and waited. Time lost its shape. Minutes felt like hours. Thoughts spiraled, then circled back. She told herself she would rest briefly, just long enough to think clearly. Her body disagreed, shivering uncontrollably. She paced to keep blood moving, afraid to sit, afraid to sleep, afraid of what might happen if she stopped paying attention. The horse pulled slightly at the reins, restless. She followed its movement, trusting instinct she didn't fully understand. It led her a short distance, then stopped, ears forward, alert. She listened too, straining for meaning. Nothing came. Still, she stayed there, believing the horse sensed something safer than where they had been. Her thoughts turned inward. She replayed the ride, searching for the moment she should have turned back. Each memory blurred into the next, stripped of certainty. Guilt crept in, heavy and useless. She wondered if anyone had noticed she was gone yet, if concern had reached beyond mild irritation. The idea of being missed felt fragile, almost dangerous to hope for. As the night deepened, exhaustion pressed down harder than fear. She leaned against the horse, drawing warmth from its body, whispering softly without realizing it. The words didn't matter. Only the sound of a human voice seemed to keep the dark from closing completely. Above her, stars burned cold and distant, offering no comfort. When she finally allowed herself to sit, she chose a position that let her stand quickly if needed. Sleep never fully came. Instead, she drifted in and out, jolting awake at imagined sounds, heart racing. The desert tested her quietly, patiently, waiting for mistakes. By the time the sky began to lighten at the edges, she had lost track of how long she'd been awake. Her body ached, her mouth dry, her thoughts slow. Night one had taken more than she realized. As dawn approached, she stood again, knowing movement would soon feel necessary, even if she didn't yet know where she was going or how much the desert had already changed her. The coming day promised no relief, only harsher light and harder choices. Somewhere beyond the rising sun, searchers would move, unaware of her condition. She lifted her head toward the horizon, understanding that daylight would demand decisions she was no longer sure she could make. Morning did not bring relief. It exposed her. Light spilled across the desert, revealing how little shelter existed around her. Rock, scrub, endless sand. The cold retreated slowly, replaced by a dry heat that pulled moisture from her skin. She stood unsteadily, legs stiff, mouth already dry. The horse snorted softly, sides heaving, as if reminding her that standing still was no longer an option. She mounted again, trusting the horse to choose direction. The sun climbed quickly, flattening shadows and stealing depth from the land. Distance became impossible to judge. A ridge looked close, then never arrived. She rationed movement, stopping often, trying to listen to her body, but thirst overruled caution. Each swallow of dry air scraped her throat, a constant reminder that time mattered more now than pride. She searched for landmarks she might recognize, replaying maps in her mind, but the desert refused alignment. Washes cut unexpectedly across her path. The horse slowed, uncertain, pausing more often. She followed anyway, believing movement equaled progress. Somewhere behind her, the trail she had taken dissolved completely, leaving no clear line back. She did not see it happen. She only felt the growing certainty that return was slipping out of reach. At the same time, search teams fanned outward miles away, following logic instead of instinct. Radios crackled with updates, coordinates, quiet frustration. "Negative sign," someone reported. Another voice answered, calm but strained, "Keep moving." They expanded the grid, unaware they were drifting farther from her. The desert absorbed their footprints as easily as it had hers, offering no correction, no warning, only space. By midday, heat pressed down relentlessly. Her lips cracked. Her thoughts slowed. She began misjudging effort, walking too far before resting too long before moving. The horse refused a steep incline, forcing her to detour, draining more energy. Frustration surfaced, sharp and dangerous. She spoke aloud without realizing it, arguing with herself, promising rest after the next rise, the next turn, the next imagined solution. She checked her phone again, sacrificing power for certainty. Still nothing. No signal. She turned it off with care, as if the gesture mattered. Water was almost gone. She rationed sips, wetting her mouth without swallowing fully. Each choice felt final. The desert offered no feedback, no sign she was improving her chances. Only endurance separated survival from collapse now. Shadows shortened, then shifted, confusing her sense of direction. She followed the sun, then doubted herself, turning slightly east, then south. The horse lagged, breathing harder. She feared pushing it too far, yet feared stopping more. Every decision felt wrong. The phrase formed uninvited in her mind, 5 miles from nowhere. Distance lost meaning. Only effort remained. As afternoon faded, the weight of isolation deepened. She realized how exposed she truly was, how small mistakes compounded quickly. The desert had stripped her down to instinct and will. Night would come again soon. The thought tightened her chest. She scanned the horizon for shelter, knowing darkness would demand a different kind of strength. Whatever choices she made next would decide how much of herself she could still hold onto. Far away, radios continued their quiet rhythm, unaware of the narrowing margin. Searchers debated routes, fuel, daylight. Someone suggested pulling back until morning. No one liked the idea, but exhaustion pressed in. The desert cooled slightly, hinting at the coming night. She felt it too, a subtle shift against her skin. She tightened her grip on the reins and moved toward a cluster of rocks, hoping for wind cover. The horse hesitated, then followed. As the sun dropped lower, she understood that survival would soon become mental as much as physical. The desert had measured her all day. Night would ask harder questions, and she did not know if she had enough answers left. She paused, listening to her breathing, aware that fear was changing shape. What waited after sunset would test endurance differently, stripping away distraction and forcing her to confront the quiet inside herself. The last light faded. She turned her face toward the cooling sky, knowing the second night would not be like the first, and that the desert was only beginning to reveal its true cost now. Night came colder than before, a sharp contrast to the punishing heat she had endured all day. The rock she had chosen for shelter offered little protection, only a thin break in the wind. She dismounted slowly, movements stiff and deliberate, aware that even small mistakes now carried consequences. The horse stood close, sides rising and falling, its presence the only reassurance left. Darkness altered the desert again. Shapes dissolved, distances collapsed, and sound traveled unpredictably. She heard her own thoughts louder than anything outside her. They came uninvited, overlapping and insistent. You should have stayed put. You should have turned back sooner. The second night stripped away the illusion that survival was only physical. Her mind began to feel like another hostile landscape she had to cross. She focused on routine to stay grounded. She checked her pockets, counted remaining supplies, repeated simple facts aloud. Her name. The date. Christmas had already passed. Saying it made the situation feel more real, more frightening. The desert did not respond. It never did. The silence forced her inward, where fear waited without distraction. Sleep hovered just out of reach. Exhaustion pulled at her, but every time she closed her eyes, panic surged. She imagined searchlights cresting the horizon, then disappearing. She imagined footsteps that never came. When the horse shifted suddenly, she startled hard, heart racing, adrenaline flooding her system for no reason at all. Her thoughts began to fracture under strain. She replayed conversations from years ago, arguments that no longer mattered, moments she regretted wasting. Memory blurred with hallucination, and she struggled to separate what was real from what her mind created to fill the emptiness. The desert tested patience by offering too much time to think and nowhere to place those thoughts safely. At some point, she began talking again, not to calm herself, but to prove she still could. Her voice sounded strange in the open air, too small, too fragile. She asked questions without expecting answers. She promised herself things she didn't know how to keep. The horse listened without judgment, ears flicking occasionally, grounded in instincts she envied. Cold crept deeper as the night stretched on. She wrapped her arms tightly, shivering uncontrollably. The physical discomfort sharpened her mental state, blurring resolve into desperation. She questioned her decisions constantly. Stay here or move at dawn. Follow the horse or trust logic. Each option carried risk, and the inability to know which was worse gnawed at her. She became aware of time passing only through pain. Her legs cramped. Her shoulders ached. Every adjustment felt exaggerated, echoing inside her skull. The desert seemed to wait, patient and observant, as if measuring how long she could endure before surrendering to exhaustion. She wondered briefly if the land always felt this alive to people who truly had nowhere else to go. Far away, search teams regrouped, their own frustration mounting. Radios hummed softly. Maps were spread again. Some believed she had traveled farther than expected. Others argued she would have stayed close. No one could agree. The desert offered no evidence to settle the debate, only darkness and distance between assumptions and reality. Back among the rocks, she curled closer to the horse, drawing what warmth she could. The animal shifted, uneasy, sensing her distress. She pressed her forehead against its shoulder and closed her eyes briefly, letting the contact anchor her. Tears came without warning, hot against cold skin, then stopped as quickly as they started, leaving her drained and oddly calm. Sometime after midnight, clarity returned in brief flashes. She realized panic wasted energy she could not afford. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each breath, grounding herself in the moment. Survive the night. That was the only goal that mattered now. Tomorrow could wait, even if tomorrow brought consequences she could not yet imagine or fully understand. When the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, relief mixed with dread. She had made it through another night, but the cost was clear. Her thoughts felt slower, edges dulled. The desert had tested her mind and found its limits. As light grew stronger, she stood carefully, knowing the coming day would demand movement again. Whatever strength remained would have to carry her forward, even as doubt whispered that endurance alone might not be enough anymore to survive another long day ahead. She faced the horizon knowing movement would begin again soon, whether guided by hope, instinct, or sheer desperation alone. Morning on the fifth day began with the same uneasy routine, search vehicles lining the edge of the desert, engines idling quietly. No one expected miracles anymore. Fatigue had settled into every movement, every decision. The land had refused them for days, and hope now felt dangerous, something handled carefully, spoken of only when necessary, never out loud. It was easier to prepare for bad news than believe in survival after so much silence and distance between questions and answers. The horse appeared without warning, walking slowly out of the desert toward the stable road. At first, no one recognized it. Then someone froze, staring too long, and said its name. The animal moved unsteadily, head low, sides heaving, scratches visible along its legs and neck. The reins hung empty. There was no saddle, no sign of the woman who had ridden out on Christmas night. Silence spread quickly, thick and heavy, as understanding settled in without any need for explanation or hopeful interpretation. The horse had come back alone. Panic arrived instantly. Radios came alive, voices overlapping as handlers moved toward the animal. Someone guided it to water. Someone else checked for injuries. Every detail was scrutinized, as if the horse itself might explain everything. How far had it traveled alone? Why had it returned now? The desert had finally spoken, but only in fragments, offering more questions instead of answers. Fear tightened around every assumption they had made so far, quietly undoing them one by one. No one. The horse's condition told its own story. Dehydrated, exhausted, and frightened, it had survived days without guidance. That meant the woman had likely been alive after the disappearance, at least long enough for the animal to separate. Speculation spread fast, each theory more urgent than the last. Search maps were redrawn. Zones expanded. Every mile the horse could have traveled became a possibility, every assumption a risk. The return felt like progress, yet deepened the mystery instead of resolving it. Hope surged, then immediately collapsed under its own weight again. News spread quickly beyond the search area. Phones rang. Cameras appeared. Headlines formed before facts could catch up. The horse became a symbol, a single image carrying fear and hope together. But for those searching, it was only a clue, and not a clear one. Animals did not follow logic. They followed instinct, fear, and survival. The desert had forced a choice no one could fully interpret yet. That uncertainty settled deep into every conversation and every plan made next. Search teams pushed outward again, driven by renewed urgency. Helicopters were requested. Dogs were brought in. Every available resource shifted direction. If the horse had found its way back, then the woman might still be moving, or she might be waiting. The difference mattered more than anything. Time compressed, each hour suddenly heavy with meaning. No one spoke about outcomes they feared, but everyone felt them pressing closer with every passing minute. The desert remained unchanged, watching quietly as always. Somewhere far beyond the search perimeter, the young woman endured another hour. Her body was weaker. Her mind blurred by heat and dehydration. She did not know the horse had returned, or that hope had flared because of it. She only knew movement hurt, stopping felt dangerous, and the desert did not care which choice she made. Survival had narrowed to endurance alone, minute by minute, step by step. She kept moving without direction, unaware of how close attention had shifted. As night approached again, searchers prepared to follow the horse's return path, believing it must lead to her. They did not yet understand that this hope would mislead them, pulling the search away from where she had actually gone. The desert had one more lesson to teach, and it would not be kind or simple. Day 5 ended with urgency, misplaced confidence, and a direction that felt right, but the search shifted direction with confidence that felt earned, almost relieved. The horse's return became the anchor point, the clearest sign anyone had seen in days. Teams followed its path back into the desert, convinced instinct had solved what logic could not. Tracks were fresher here, easier to read, and that alone made the decision feel right. Hope, once fragile, hardened into certainty. Helicopters swept low, blades cutting the air, scanning for movement or color against endless sand. Dogs worked the ground, noses down, handlers watching closely for any change in behavior. Radios carried updates in clipped tones. Every new mile covered felt productive, reassuring. The desert, at last, seemed to be yielding something tangible. But the land remained deceptive. The horse's route curved unexpectedly, avoiding difficult terrain, favoring familiarity over logic. It led toward areas already searched, places where effort had been spent and nothing found. Some noticed the pattern and hesitated, but momentum carried the operation forward. The animal had survived. The animal had returned. That had to mean something. Doubt was quieter than urgency, and urgency won. Hours passed with no sign of her. The heat rose, distorting the horizon, flattening shapes into mirages. Searchers paused more often, fatigue creeping back in. Confidence began to fray at the edges. The horse's trail ended abruptly near a road, dissolving into hard ground where nothing could be tracked further. The realization hit slowly. They had reached the limit of this lead. Frustration followed. Questions surfaced again, sharper now. What if the horse had run blindly? What if fear, not direction, had guided it home? The possibility settled heavily, unwelcome but undeniable. The clue they had trusted might never have pointed toward her at all. It might only have pointed away. Far from the concentrated search, the young woman struggled through another stretch of desert, her condition worsening. Dehydration hollowed her movements. Thoughts slipped out of sequence. She stopped more often, sitting where she shouldn't, standing when rest was needed. She no longer measured distance, only pain. Every step felt borrowed from reserves she no longer possessed. The sun burned relentlessly. Her skin felt tight, her vision narrowing at the edges. She spoke less now, conserving energy, her mind drifting in and out of focus. The desert seemed to pulse around her, heat rising in waves. She did not know she had been unintentionally moving away from the search for days, drifting in a direction no one expected or planned for. Back near the road, search leaders faced difficult choices. Resources were thinning. Exhaustion pressed against judgment. Some argued to widen the search again, others to concentrate efforts where probability remained highest. The horse's return, once a gift, now felt like a misdirection they had followed too far. Time lost could not be recovered. As daylight waned, the decision was made to pull back and reassess. It felt like admitting failure without saying the word. The desert did not acknowledge the shift. It never did. Vehicles turned around, dust rising briefly before settling again, erasing signs of presence almost immediately. That night, maps were spread once more, fingers tracing possibilities that now felt endless and inadequate. No one spoke easily. Hope remained, but it had changed shape, quieter and more cautious. The realization settled in that survival, if it was still happening, was happening somewhere they had not yet looked. Out in the open, the young woman slowed to a stop as evening approached, her strength nearly gone. She lowered herself carefully, unsure if she could stand again without help. The desert cooled, shadows lengthening. She stared at the ground in front of her, unable to lift her head for long. Night would come soon, and with it, another test. Unknown to her, the search had turned away once more, leaving distance between rescue and reality to stretch even further into the darkness ahead. Night settled in without ceremony, the heat of the day draining away as quickly as her strength had. She remained where she had stopped, sitting against the uneven ground, unsure if standing again was possible. Her muscles trembled uncontrollably, not from cold alone, but from exhaustion that had reached its limit. The desert had taken everything it could from her body, and now it waited to see what would remain. She tried to stand once. The effort ended halfway, her legs buckling beneath her weight. Pain flared sharply, then dulled into something distant. She stayed down, breathing shallowly, afraid that another attempt would cost more than she could give. The realization was terrifying in its simplicity. Her body was no longer obeying intention. Her thoughts drifted, unmoored from urgency. Hunger and thirst blurred into a single ache, constant and consuming. She pressed her tongue against dry lips, tasting nothing. The desert air felt thick in her lungs, each breath an effort she had to remind herself to take. She counted them quietly, afraid that stopping would be easier than continuing. Memories surfaced without warning, vivid and disordered. Faces appeared, conversations replayed, moments from her life rising and fading without logic. She reached for one thought and lost it immediately, replaced by another. Time fractured. Minutes stretched, then vanished. The present slipped out of focus, replaced by a haze where past and imagination overlapped. She spoke once, a single word, testing whether her voice still worked. It came out cracked and weak, barely audible. The sound startled her. She hadn't realized how long she had been silent. The desert absorbed the noise instantly, offering no echo, no reassurance that sound still existed beyond her own body. Cold crept in again, sharper than before. She wrapped her arms around herself, fingers numb, movements slow. Shivering returned, violent and exhausting. Her mind tried to problem-solve, to think of shelter, of movement, of strategy, but every thought collapsed under its own weight. Logic required energy she no longer had. She lay back carefully, staring up at the sky. The stars seemed closer now, almost oppressive in their clarity. She wondered if this was what it felt like to disappear, not dramatically, but quietly, piece by piece. The fear that followed was brief and strangely muted. Panic required strength too. Somewhere in the distance, an animal moved. The sound barely registered. She was aware of it, but it no longer demanded response. Her body had narrowed the world to a small circle of sensation: cold, thirst, pressure against the ground. Everything else felt optional, distant, unimportant. She thought about sleeping and felt relief at the idea. Rest promised escape from discomfort, from effort, from decision. A part of her recognized the danger in that thought, the finality hidden inside it. She forced her eyes open again, staring at nothing, repeating her name silently, anchoring herself to something solid, something that meant continuation. Minutes passed. Or hours. She could no longer tell. Her breathing slowed. Each inhale felt shallow, incomplete. She shifted slightly, trying to find a position that hurt less, but pain followed her everywhere. The desert did not rush her. It waited, patient and indifferent, as it always had. Far away, under artificial light, search leaders made plans for morning. New areas were marked. Old assumptions discarded. A decision was made to push farther than before, to look where logic had once said not to. No one spoke about how little time might be left. They only prepared to move again. Out in the open, the young woman clung to consciousness by instinct alone. She pressed her nails into her palm, welcoming the sharpness, anything to stay present. Her body had begun to fail her, but her mind, fractured and exhausted, still resisted surrender. She did not know if it would be enough. As the night deepened, she stopped trying to move. She focused instead on staying awake, on breathing, on surviving one moment at a time. Somewhere beyond the darkness, help might be coming, or it might not. She could not control that. All she could do was endure, even as her body signaled that it was ready to give up, even as the desert closed in, waiting to see which would break first. Morning arrived quietly, light spilling across the desert with no regard for what had unfolded during the night. Far from the main search area, a small team moved through terrain that had been marked low-priority days earlier. There was no confidence in this direction, only a growing awareness that certainty had failed them before. They moved slower, scanning the ground with tired eyes, expecting nothing. The first sign was not dramatic. A shape that didn't belong. A shadow that didn't match the land. One rescuer stopped, raised a hand, and looked again. At first it seemed like a rock, then fabric, then the outline of a human body pressed too still against the earth. No one spoke. Radios were silent. The desert held its breath. They approached carefully, unsure what they would find. She lay curled slightly on her side, skin sunburned and cracked, lips swollen, eyes closed. For a moment, no one could tell if she was alive. Then her chest moved, barely, but enough. Relief came hard and sudden, followed immediately by urgency. "Hey," someone said softly, kneeling beside her. "You're okay. You're not alone." The words felt fragile, as if speaking louder might break the moment. She did not respond at first. Her body remained heavy, uncooperative, as though it no longer trusted voices. A hand brushed her shoulder gently. She stirred, a faint sound escaping her throat, somewhere between breath and word. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, then closed again. It was enough. Radios crackled to life, voices tight with disbelief. "We have her. She's alive." The desert seemed unchanged as help arrived. Medical responders moved quickly, methodically, checking vitals, shielding her from the sun. For fluids were started carefully. Every touch was deliberate, practiced. She winced faintly, registering pain without understanding it. Her body had endured too much to react normally now. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, she murmured something unintelligible. One rescuer leaned closer. "You're safe," he said again, more firmly this time. "We've got you." Her fingers twitched weakly, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. The horse. The night. The desert. It all blurred together. The helicopter arrived in a rush of wind and noise, breaking the silence that had defined the past days. As she was loaded aboard, the land beneath her receded, becoming distance at last. She did not see it. Her eyes stayed closed, her breathing shallow but steady, clinging to the rhythm of survival she had learned the hard way. News traveled faster than anyone expected. Phones rang. Voices broke. Relief mixed with shock. She had been found where maps said she shouldn't be, where logic hadn't led them, where the desert had quietly carried her without leaving signs behind. The realization was unsettling. The land had not followed rules. Neither had survival. In the hospital, warmth replaced cold, light replaced darkness. She drifted in and out, awareness returning in fragments. Faces appeared, voices familiar but distant. Her throat burned. Her body ached in ways she could not yet name. Doctors spoke softly, explaining dehydration, exposure, exhaustion. Survival, they said, had been unlikely. That word lingered longer than anything else. Later, when she could speak, her voice was barely more than a whisper. She asked about the horse. When told it had returned, she closed her eyes again, tears slipping free without sound. The separation had marked the beginning of something she had not understood at the time. Alone, she had kept moving. Lost, she had survived. The story unfolded slowly afterward, piece by piece. How the horse had followed instinct home. How the search had followed the wrong path because of it. How she had drifted farther than anyone imagined, pushed by fear, heat, and hope tangled together. There were no villains, no single mistake to blame. Only decisions made under pressure and a landscape that punished certainty. Recovery would take time. Her body healed faster than her mind. Nightmares came. Silence felt heavy. The desert lingered in her thoughts, vast and patient, a place that had nearly taken everything. Survival did not feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. When she finally left the hospital, cameras waited, questions ready. She said very little. There were no answers that fit easily into headlines. She had been found where no one looked because no one knew where to look. The desert had taught that lesson without mercy. Long after the search ended, the land remained unchanged. Tracks erased. Paths forgotten. Only memory carried what had happened there. And somewhere between Christmas night and the day she was found, a young woman had crossed a line few ever see, learning how thin survival can be, and how quietly the desert decides who it will return.